All right, my friends, we got a treat here for you today. We got my man Finn McKenty from the great state of Washington to share with us how he is approaching financial independence. So Finn must have been born with a silver spoon in his mouth because under Biden's economy, no one can get by. You know
We're
what
all
I'm
screwed. We're doomed. You might
saying?
as well just dig a hole and jump in it right now because Emperor Biden has doomed you, or Emperor Trump, whatever, whichever one you hate,
They're gonna
you
put you
pick.
in jail,
That's
Finnegan.
right.
They're coming to get you right now. I'm just saying Finnegan because that's the name of my dog. It's just I kind of have a.
Oh, okay.
It's just I don't maybe I didn't tell you that, but my dog's called Finnegan, so that's why it's just
Got
kind
it.
of saying that Finnegan. I won't say that anymore. But
Indiana is the dog's name.
huh?
We're from Indiana Jones. He said, Indiana is the dog's name.
Hmm, okay, I don't know that. Is that
Oh,
is
it's
that
just a,
true with
yeah, it's just a line from the movie, whatever.
from Indiana Jones with what's that guy's name? Who's in that?
Harrison Ford. Yeah.
Harrison Ford. Do you know the backstory between Steve? What's the guy's name who started Indiana Jones? It's some
Steven
sick.
Spielberg. No, I don't. But people came here to hear about money, not Indiana
Yes,
Jones.
look, it's some sick stuff. That guy, man. Anyway, they also want to hear about Metal Blade Records too, Bob.
Right.
All right, so Finn, you're about 8 years younger than me. We're slowly, well, actually, pretty rapidly now, because it always works. It starts slow and then it just accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. You're the living personification of it, starting with just a freaking peanut and just growing and growing and growing.
Yep.
So, Finn, welcome aboard. Tell us how did just give us a little bit of background about you, and let's just go from there if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, long story short, there are people that grew up in worse circumstances than I did, but it wasn't amazing, just so everybody knows, that my dad was a correction. Well, the person I don't know my father. The person I call my dad is like my stepdad. And he was a corrections officer. My mom never really had a career. She worked at like a plant nursery and sort of on and off different kind of stuff. I didn't know anything about money at all or anything like that. Nobody in my family did. I have three uncles who went to prison. My other stepdad went to prison. My other uncle got murdered. My brother killed himself. My stepsister OD'd. So like everybody in my family, God bless them. It's not a judgment, but they're not the sort of people that understand, personal finance or business or anything like that. So I didn't know anything about this stuff. I had no idea what, a 401k or an IRA was until I was probably, I don't know, 23 or something like that. It just never even crossed my mind to even think about that at all until I was into my 20s.
So, when you're in the teens, you weren't like in the investment club or anything like that.
No, no, I was sort of an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Although, back at that time, of course, you remember like people didn't really use that word, but I
Right.
was, I had a lot of little hustles going on. But no, I wasn't doing it for the purpose of making money. I was doing it because I just sort of wanted to do stuff, and of course, in hindsight, I probably would have done some things differently, but definitely not an investment club or like it did not ever cross my mind.
What I'm curious about the entrepreneurial stuff, the side hustle, because I had some of that myself too, and I'm just I mean, were you born like independent minded, or you just said, I
Yes.
see what's going on. My see, I
No,
was more though. Yeah, go ahead, go
no,
ahead.
I was just born with the desire to make stuff,
Yeah,
which I still have. And like, I'm not as much into consuming. I like making stuff. And so
yeah, yeah.
you'll understand this. The people watching this may not know what this is, but I started making fanzines when I was like 14 or 15 years old, which was basically like a little independent magazine that you would sell through the mail back in the 90s. And I sold a couple thousand of them by the time I was out of high school,
Really?
which is pretty impressive now that I think about it, that I'd go to school after
Yeah.
school. When I was 16, I'd go to the post office and be mailing stuff to like Singapore and Finland and whatnot, and
Wait,
like,
so this is what the '90s?
yeah, like
So this is
95.
right when the internet. How did people find you, man? Did you advertise or something? That's
Yeah.
pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I would advertise it. I won't bore everyone with the details, but yeah, I had ways of advertising sort of through the network of all those
Yeah.
things.
Right on, man.
Yeah, so I sold a couple thousand of them by the time I was out of high
That's
school, which
what's
is pretty
great. Oh
amazing.
man, that's that. And I tell you, that's so you're doing that. You're making a little bit of money. You know what I'm saying? You're doing what you
Yep.
like. But
And
still, the
working
idea.
6 days a week when I was in high school also.
Now, do you think you did that because also you said, man, when I'm looking at my parents over here, my stepdad, my mom, I'm going to go the exact opposite because those guys are whack. You know what I'm saying? Is that another thing? Or just think you're
Yeah,
just
I mean a little bit of both. Like I wasn't thinking about the financial side of it, but certainly, I saw my parents were hippies, and my dad sort of, my dad, the corrections officer, he sort of got himself out of that stuff. He was real far gone, in his heyday. He was like a straight up junkie, but he got out of it and sort of turned his life around and stuff, and he's doing great now. But I saw, how my parents and their friends sort of where the free love and all that kind of crap, where it got him. And I was like, not
yeah.
me.
All right. So you're doing the zines and you're going to, you're going to high school and stuff. You're an entrepreneur. And then you have no, it's still, we're not talking about investments by any stretch of imagination. Now we're
Right.
just trying to get by essentially.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
Now you didn't go to college. You went to college right out of the gate, if memory serves, and you dropped out or something like
Yeah.
that.
I
Okay.
didn't I didn't go back until I was 25, and I graduated when I was 30, like right
Okay.
after I turned 30.
So by now, you're kind of in the we'll just say the punk rock scene, basically
Yep.
hardcore scene. You're not really doing anything, not making much money.
Right.
And you said, this I got to get out of it because I'm
Yep.
getting older at this stage.
Yep.
All right. So at this stage, though, you're introduced like a 401k, like for before you finish college or something like that. Or when did
Yeah,
you start?
I was working like more or less full time when I was in college at a an agency that did like industrial design and engineering. And we had a 401k as part of that. And so we had whatever the guy from Vanguard or whoever it was, that
Yeah.
administered it, came by and sort of explained these things to us. And I also was fortunate enough to have a cousin, the one person in our family that's not a screw up. Him and his cousin, my two cousins, one of them started working like in tech back in the 90s. He worked for SGI, if you remember them.
Hmm.
They made like the fancy computers that they used for like Jurassic Park and all that kind of stuff. Like it's called very, very early, like Silicon Valley company. And then he started working at,
I do kind of, yeah, right on.
yeah.
All
And
right.
then he also started working at Google before they IPO'd.
Okay.
And then they laid him off after 20 years. But and then so I don't know him that well, but his brother, who was he was the black sheep of the family because he was the president of the Young Republicans Club when he was in high school. Uh, he's a few years older than me, and he might be the same age as you. And he ended up getting an MBA and becoming an investment banker and doing a lot of sort of real estate stuff. And he sort of broke a lot of this stuff down for me when I was maybe 24 or 25. And
Yeah.
that was really like the light bulb moment for me when I was like, oh, now it makes sense. And I was also going to school for business at the time. So I was taking all these like finance and econ classes and stuff like that. And that's when all the rules of the game sort of
Right.
made
Yeah.
themselves apparent to me. And this is why like index investing, when I was just started to have a little bit of money, in this 401k and stuff,
Yeah.
is exactly when I was also taking these like finance and econ classes and stuff. And I would ask, I would actually go to like in the office hours and stuff like that, which nobody does. But I was like, well, I'm paying for it. So I'm going to take full advantage of this. And
Right.
I would ask everybody that I could ask, like, is there a reason I shouldn't just invest in like the S&P? And everyone's just like, nope. I'm like, well, I don't understand. Why do people not just do that? And they're like, I don't know. So I was
So
converted to,
you're a young punk rock kid, tattoos. You're showing this is the '90s before everyone had
yeah.
tattoos. So you're showing up to your guy, you're like, why not just do the SP 500? They're like, you got it, man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because they would explain the math. Like we would actually have to do the calculations of like, diversification and like idiosyncratic versus systemic risk and stuff. So like I actually did the math, and I was like, so mathematically, like this is the way, right? And they're like, yep.
You're like, but all these other people are saying
Right.
otherwise. I wonder because they have some skin in the game. I'm just showing.
Right.
All right, so you're
Oh,
now,
so
yeah.
E-Trade, the platform that gets paid per
Yes.
trade, they want you to trade as often as possible. Interesting.
Right. Right. Oh my! The funny thing is, you might not know this. E-Trade, they got sued by Merrill Lynch because I don't know if you might not remember. They probably do. They had these huge commercials back in the '90s, man.
Yeah, I remember.
With all
Yeah.
these
When
rich,
that was like a new thing.
yes, and they had all
Yeah.
these like rich brokers, their hot wives, their hot huge
Yeah.
houses, and the Merrill Lynch said, "You can't say that about us, but it's kind of true, man." I say, but that's kind of the way the business is. So rich brokers,
Right.
we're the yachts for the clients. All right,
Right.
so
Right.
so now you're like, okay, your cousin tells you, hey, your cousin's brother tells you this, like that makes sense. You're in some school, that makes sense. And you're like, okay, I'm kind of getting the mathematics behind this because it's
Yes.
not that complex for heaven's sake. You know what I'm
It's
saying? You
really
don't
not.
have to
Yep.
be Mr. Burns to understand this. You're like, all
Right.
right. So
Problem is
then
they
what
didn't have
happened?
any money.
Yeah, right,
So I was like, cool, I get it. But I also
right.
did the math of like, I can only invest whatever it was, like a couple grand a year, because I like, for one, I had huge student loans
Yeah,
and I just wasn't making that much money. So I was like, I can invest a couple grand a year, which is nice. But, I do the math. By the time I'm 60, I'm only going to have whatever it would have been, like 90 grand or some,
yeah,
you know, I don't want to diminish that, but like that's, when you're 60 years old, that's not a lot of money.
yeah.
So that was really scary. And basically at that moment, like from the time I was like probably 25 or 26, when I sort of had this sort of awakening when I was in school and understood this stuff, like basically all my energy has gone into like trying to climb out of that hole and make some money. And, because I understood the math, I was like, okay, like basically there's a deadline approaching me, and I need to have this shit figured out by the time that deadline hits, or it's going to be bad. Like when my mom died, she was 69. I think she had like $44,000 or something, and I was like, terrified when I found that out, because it's like, what if she would have lived? And
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm glad she's dead, but like,
Right. No,
it's like,
understood. Absolutely.
what was her plan? There wasn't a plan. Right. And so that's basically how I have felt as soon as I learned how this stuff works. I felt like I had a gun at my head the whole time to like figure it out. And, thank God I did. But, it wasn't by accident. It's because, you know, basically every waking moment, other than if I'm doing something with my wife and my family, like I have been laser focused on like, how do I make some money and start putting it in that, piggy bank,
Yeah,
so that when I get to be this age, I can chill.
yeah.
Cause you don't want to be elderly and poor. That's a rough spot to be.
Now, all right. So the last, let's say 10 years ago, you're probably sitting on a little bit more money than you had when you're 10 years previous to that, but you're
Not
still probably,
much.
yeah, I was gonna say you're still
Yeah.
probably thinking you're behind the eight ball. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
When I was 35, I had, I don't know, 30 grand or something like that invested. I don't remember exactly the number, but definitely less than 100, like a lot less than 100.
And you're still thinking, yeah, as time is creeping up on.
Yeah, it's terrifying. To be honest with you, it was terrifying, because I was like, I do the math and okay, if I'm lucky, this turns into whatever, like 250 or something like that by the time I'm, 65. And that's better than nothing, but it's not where you want to be when you're 65.
You still had student loans at that point 10 years ago?
Yes. Yeah. I
Okay.
had like 80 grand or something like that. Cause I took a calculated, people are going to say that was stupid, but it wasn't. It
Yeah.
was a calculated risk on my part. I paid out of state tuition the first year, which was like 30 grand, because I said, well, I could live here for another year and work at McDonald's or whatever to get residency, but I'm going to give up a year of my
Yeah.
life to
Okay.
save 20 grand. No.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
chose to take on that additional debt, and, that hurt, but it worked out. I'm glad I did it. All of this was a calculated risk. So basically, like where I'm at right now is I have enough invested that if I did not invest another dollar, that by the time I'm 60 in 15 years, assuming some reasonable rate of return, which a fairly conservative one, then I would end up with $6 million in 20 years. Sorry,
All right, so
60,
hold on a second. By the time, if you didn't invest another dime by the time you're 60, that's what 70,
65, sorry,
65.
65. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. 20 years from now, you'd have $6 million.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And that's not a 12 or 15 or 20% rate of return. That's a
Nope.
conservative rate of return.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep. Yep.
So from 10 years ago to now, all right, so I'm assuming student loans are paid off,
Yep.
but you
Cars are
took
paid
on a
off.
mortgage. You got a
Yes.
wife now, you got a kid.
Yep. I could pay the mortgage off right now, but it's at 2.8%. So
Hey, what
there's
I'm
no
saying.
reason to do that.
But once the student loans are paid off, all of a sudden that is free cash flow that you just,
Exactly.
assuming you start plugging, instead of spending on freaking
Yep.
high fancy hats, you start saying I'm freaking putting that money in.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. So what I did is, so I was working full time, of course, this whole time. And I had a good job. I worked at a company called Creative Live, which was like a Series B Silicon Valley startup where I was getting paid reasonably well. Like probably a little bit over six figures in total comp. But, when you have 80 grand in student loans and you live in Seattle, that's not a lot. It's okay, but it's not a lot. So what I did is I started hustling and freelancing a lot. So this was like 2014 or so. I learned how to run Facebook ads,
Yeah,
which at the time was a
yeah,
thing not very many people knew how to do. And Facebook ads back then worked really, 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 really well. So I ended up running ads for a friend of mine. They were launching a software company and they're like, hey, could you help us with this? And I was like, sure, why not? And it kind of like blew their expectations away. Like they wanted to make, I want to say it was like 60 grand or something in the first month. And I think we did like 180 or I don't, I'm making up the numbers, but it was
Right,
something
right.
like that. It was like several times higher than the projection. And they were like, holy crap. And so they, word basically spread through word of mouth through some of their friends that like, hey, like this guy made us a shitload of money.
Right, right.
And when you know how to make other people money, guess what? They will pay you a lot of money.
Yeah, 100%.
So I would charge people, between like $1,000 and $3,000 a month to run ads for their business. And, will you pay me $1,000 a month if that generates an incremental $5,000 a month in profit for you? Of course you will. You
I'll
know,
pay 2,000 a month. You know what I'm saying?
Totally, totally. And it will sting a little bit. You don't like writing that check, but the math works out. And that's one of the great things. So the takeaway for this here for people is to number one, put yourself as close to revenue as possible.
Yeah,
Because at that point, your value cannot really be debated. The closer
100%.
you are, like if you're in sales,
Right.
if you do performance marketing, any of these things where it's very clear that you push a button and then money comes out the other end, and now it's sort of just a negotiation point of like how much of that incremental profit goes to you versus the company, and that's just sort of up to you to figure it out. But the point is, like, you can say, look, you don't have to keep paying me, but if I go away, this money faucet turns off, and you probably don't want that,
Yeah,
right?
I couldn't. That's why they always gripe about the sales guys. Why the sales guys make so much more than the admin guys? Because the sales guys are bringing the
Because
revenue.
they're
That's
a profit center, not a cost center.
100%.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
word kind of
yeah,
spread, and before I knew it, I was, I would have 3, 4, 5, 6 clients a month paying me for this stuff. And so for a couple years, I was making an extra like $4,000 to $7,000 a month or something doing this stuff. And now that adds up real fast. Right. And so the first thing I did was I paid off my car, because that was like, I don't know, I think I owed $15,000 on it or something at like 5%. And I was like, okay, let me just knock that out. So I did.
yeah.
And then I paid off my student loans starting. So a lot of these were private loans that were at a floating rate. And at the time, rates were very low.
Oh yeah,
So it was okay. They were like 3 or 4% or something. It was like prime plus one, or I don't remember what it was, something like that. But I knew that it was only a matter of time before
yeah,
rates went up, which, obviously that ended up happening. So, again, because I went to school for this shit, I'm not going to say that I'm like the master of it, but I understood, for all the people who say you don't learn anything in college, that's because you're not paying attention or you didn't ask the right questions. Because I learned about interest rates in school and I understood how they were set and what, the prime rate, federal funds rate is. And I understand that they go up and down. I'm like, okay, right now they are very low because I graduated in 2009. So this was like, the beginning of the ZERP era. And I was like, okay, I want to pay this shit off before they go up again and it starts getting uncomfortable. My student loan payments were like $700 a month or something at the beginning.
yeah.
I don't know what they would be at current rates, but I bet it'd probably be close to double that, you know?
Oof.
I would guess. I don't know. I'd have to do the math. But
Yeah,
point
still,
is, I knocked all that stuff out. And so now all of a sudden I was like, to your point, all that free cash flow,
exactly. Yeah,
from my freelancing and even from my job. Now, instead of sort of sweating living month to month, I'm like, okay, now I'm getting several $1,000s a month, that I can do whatever I want with it. But I still stayed, my wife and I were not married at that point, but we lived together in a little 800 square foot apartment in Seattle. And we stayed in that apartment for a couple years, and I started putting money away. And then we bought a condo in 2016, um, because I knew again that interest rates were low and it was competitive. And everyone's like, "Oh, I'm going to wait to buy a house until the market crashes." I'm like, "Okay, take a look at the West Coast.
yeah,
Zoom out for, don't look at any 2-year period. Yeah. So between 2009 and 2012, like,
yeah,
yeah, rate values went down, but like zoom out to like 5 or 10 years. There's no world in which West Coast property values are going down long term.
yeah,
Right. And interest rates back then could only go up.
right.
So once again, and again, this is like stuff, it's basic stuff, but these are things I learned in school, and you can Even if you didn't go to school for it, you can go look on Reddit or Bogleheads. Like all the stuff is out there. You can learn all of it, or your channel, like any of these places. So bought that condo in 2016. I want to say our interest rate at the time was like 3.8, which I thought was amazing at the time, and it was.
Yep.
And then we sold that in 2021 and moved somewhere cheaper. Moved about 70 miles south to be closer to my wife's parents. And bought our current house in 2021, like right before at the end of 21, like right before rates went up. So we got in at 2.8. And made like 130 grand off that condo in 5 years. And then my YouTube channel started making like even more money. And basically I made a shitload of money in about 4 years, and with all that debt paid off, like I just shovel, like if you looked at my checking account balance, it's pretty low.
Right.
Because why would I want that sitting in a checking account? Right. So I just shovel every cent I can into that VTI, and I don't care if the market is up or down today or tomorrow. I just keep shoveling it in there. During 2023, when the market was like kind of rocky, it wasn't fun some of those months to put, 5 figures into there and see it go down 4%. But again, I know the math. I know that, there's 2 outcomes here. Either the United States economy, goes bust, in which case we've all got much bigger problems.
Yep.
Or is going to go up again. And I'm
Right.
going to, and my only regret will be that I didn't invest more.
Well, the craziest thing too, when you put it in VTI as opposed to a checking account, it's not as liquid. You don't think about it. You don't say, "Oh man, I could buy a beach home. I could do this." You're like,
Right.
the money's kind of out there, which meant there's just this, for me at least, it's a psychological component of that says, if I sell that, I mean, I have to sell, which means it's no longer there.
Yep.
And the thing I'm buying to replace that, is that worth that was not there anymore? And that just, so a lot of people keep their money in liquid savings. I'm like, don't do that, man. Shovel that sucker. That's why one of the things that pissed me off about all these guys saying, the average American doesn't have $400 in their savings account. I said, but that they're looking at it wrong, because they don't look at the fact that a guy like Finn, I don't know how much you got in your savings account, but
a lot more than $400, but it's not as much as, as you might think.
Right, but a lot of people do.
Well, actually, no, I have $0 in savings accounts. I have a checking account. I have 0 in savings.
I put all my money is in my VTI. I have a little bit, $2,000 in my real emergency account, and everything else is sitting on there. And I said, look, if I need liquidity, I got my VTI, I got a credit card to pay the bills. But just because I don't have the 400, I do have the 400, but still, I don't want it sitting in my savings.
No, why would I want that? Like our emergency fund is in a money market account in Vanguard.
Yeah,
where I make
$5.25. Exactly.
Yeah, so I make $400 a month off it just to sit there.
Just to sit there with no risk. Right. So in my opinion, just like always, what I say to people on my YouTube channel is, once the debt is paid off, man, you're freeing up the $700, but you're also freeing up what could have been $1,400 a month if the rates went higher. So imputed income is what this is called. Like, once you have a house that's paid off, you no longer have the mortgage to pay, which means you're living rent free essentially. You no longer have the student loans to pay, which means you're living rent free, which also means you don't need the income to pay that, which means you don't need to pay the tax on the income to pay it. It's so, if people could just learn to say the debt is what's holding you back. Now, obviously, Finn, you caught a couple breaks, but you created your own luck.
Look, I get up at 4 a.m. every day, and by the time I wake my kid up at 6:30, I've been working for hours. And I'm not saying everyone has to do that. It's a choice.
Right.
Do you want to watch football today? Yeah. Do you want to watch football today?
Right.
Or could you spend that 3 hours cold emailing businesses in your area to try to drum up some work? It's your choice. If you want to watch football, that's cool. I'm not judging.
But don't turn around and say, "Oh my goodness, I didn't get the breaks." You didn't get the breaks because you weren't on in the game while God was down on you. Oh, it drives you up the wall.
It's all a choice. You can make as much. You know who told me this of all people is Benji from Good Charlotte. I was talking to him about this stuff a couple years ago, and he was like, I was sort of stressing about something. And he just stopped me, and he was like, "You can make as much money as you want, man." And I was like,
"Really?
So true."
It's been. Anyway, so that's so now we're sitting here. We're looking at never touching putting anything else in there. $6 million. So let's just reduce that for inflation. Say it's worth $3 million. You know what I'm saying? So
Sure.
now you're 65 years old. You got no mortgage. You're sitting on 3 million bucks, and that's the thing. The beautiful thing about
Yeah,
compounding.
although even then it's like I don't like it when people do that because it's like they're sort of making themselves unnecessarily fearful. Like you're saying well, it's not really $6 million, it's 3 million. No, it's $6 million, right? And so there's a question of what inflation is going to look
Yeah,
like and
right,
purchasing
right.
power and all that stuff. But like you're putting yourself in a scarcity mindset that I think is not helpful. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do.
Like I get what you're saying also,
Yeah.
but when people say that,
No,
like,
it's really 6 million bucks, but it's
yes,
still not
exactly.
right. I mean,
Yeah, what is
I
the purchasing power of
right.
that is another
That's why it's kind
question.
of reducing it for
Yeah.
the sake of 3 million for purchasing power.
Yeah.
Either way, but still, it's a hell of a lot of money no matter how we look at
Yeah,
it. But
exactly. That's the point.
it started because Finn said way back here, I'm going to start even with a freaking a penny. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
that's the thing. Like you just got to start, man. And people don't. And you know, I'm 53 now, man, and you're 45, and like
Yep.
everyone says, I wish I would have known this earlier. I wish I would have started earlier. And a lot of my people, my YouTube channel are already, 50s and 60s
Yep.
and whatever. So they know this. But man, that's what I just say. It's like just freaking do $50 a month. It might not seem
Yep.
like much, but man,
Skip
that
going to the bar once a week or whatever
once,
it is, you
dude,
know?
totally. Well, it's kind of like you said, you went to school that one extra year that you said, I'm not going to delay it. That year is worth a crap load of money in terms of
Yes.
compounding over many years.
Yep.
It's an opportunity cost
Yeah,
for
exactly.
but
Exactly.
it's huge in the future, man.
Yeah. So
100%.
I would say that $20,000 of additional, tuition, well, like, of course I'm glad. I'm like people when I say they're like, oh my God, like,
What
no,
an
that's like
idiot.
one of the best investments I ever made.
Man,
Would you
100%.
give me 20,000? If I pay you $20,000, can I shave a year off your life? I would hope not.
Not on that, but it's real money. If I have, let's just say $1 million, we'll just say
Yeah.
$1 million, and I get a 15% rate of return, that $1 million now 150. I made
Right.
150,000 because I started when I was 23 as opposed to
Yep.
24. So it
Yep.
cost me 20 to get 150. Now, obviously, the
Yep.
market goes up and down. I grant you, but
Sure.
still, the market can, the trajectory is always like that.
Yep.
Man,
And
that's
if you
been
don't believe that, then you should be buying water, guns, and ammo, not the S&P.
right. And but I mean, I sit there and always too it bothers me. Like, oh, the stock market's a gamble. Like, what?
No.
We go to these companies, they have real people, they're selling us real products, they have real employees, they
Yeah.
make real earnings, they really use those earnings to buy back shares, to give you dividends, to pay people, whatever. And we can gripe all that we want about the McDonald's CEO
Sure.
and all that makes I get all that. At the end of the day, though, these are companies we frequent. They're still giving us a service that we buy, and now
Right.
you can take advantage of the market by being a part owner.
So
That's
number one, it's not gambling because gambling creates risk for its own sake, like baccarat or whatever blackjack. It creates
yeah,
risk purely for the sake of creating risk to
100%.
make you the dopamine hit in your
Yes.
brain.
Right.
Risk exists in investments, but it's a byproduct of the decisions that these companies make, and so it's sort of a question you as a shareholder sort of have to ask yourself of whether this is, a worthwhile risk or not. But it's not gambling.
Oh,
And from a practical perspective, I would say, all right, well, what's the alternative? You want to be a gold bug and like go
right.
bury a bunch of gold bars in your backyard? Go for it.
Or you want to consume it all. And if you consume it all, don't
Listen.
gripe at me when you're
Yeah, go for
65
it.
years old without a pot to piss in. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? That's fine. But don't sit around, America screwed me over. I'm like, no,
Right. No,
we
you played
understand like
yourself,
everybody else.
just
Yeah,
like my parents and their friends did, unfortunately. Now, my dad and his wife, my stepmom, were smart and they worked for the state for
yeah.
25 years, so they've got their pension and they're good. They both worked in corrections, so they babysat all the murderers and criminals and stuff like that to keep us safe. And now they're sitting pretty. They're not rich, but they don't need to be. They've got their they live in a retirement community, a nice little 2-bedroom apartment. They're good. And that's a perfectly valid path too.
Absolutely. Contentment, man.
Yep.
Contentment is a spice of life, dude. Just
Yep.
be content with your current lot. And if you don't like your current lot, well, get out there
Change it.
and 100%, man. 100%. All right. That's good stuff, Finn. So, all right. So we got Finn McKenty at the Finn McKenty YouTube channel, and we got the Punk Rock MBA as well. And you're on, you're still doing your podcast, like, I don't know, you do an Apple podcast or something?
No, I stopped doing that. But if you like if you like any of what I'm talking about here, sort of from the business perspective, check me out on LinkedIn. That's where I talk about this stuff.
Yeah, LinkedIn, and then you're also doing, because I do get a lot of people start off on YouTube. Finn. I've introduced many people who, for some of these guys, are actually making decent money.
Okay.
You're also doing a thing where you can teach people how to do YouTube, like how you've jumped quite successfully as well, right? You're still
Yep.
doing it. All right.
Yeah. I teach entrepreneurs how to grow their business using LinkedIn and YouTube.
But LinkedIn too. Okay,
Yep.
cool. I don't know if I'm connected you on LinkedIn. I have to follow you there. All right. Right on, man. Any last words, any thoughts to say, and then we'll get off this and I'll chat with you offline. But any other things you want to tell the folk?
Last thing I would say is just don't play the blame game.
Oh,
If you don't like your situation, change it.
yeah.
And no matter how sorry you feel for yourself, there's someone else that had it worse than you. So just it is a pointless exercise. Just take all that energy and instead of complaining and feeling sorry for yourself, do something.
Yeah, but Biden's holding me down. Joe Biden's hands on me right now.
This boot on your neck.
Right on, man. All right, thanks, Finn. Hey, Hank, I'll put the folks. I'll put the links to Finn stuff in the show notes. So hang tight. Thanks, Finn. 1 second. We'll stop recording right there. Stop recording. All right.